This whole phenomenon, Candy, of the screaming at concerts, the boys didn't do it, I don't think. The girls did. Why were the girls screaming so much when we wanted to hear the music? And you hear stories about the Beatles playing in Stockholm, and they loved it there because the audience would listen rather than scream. And some of the recordings of those shows are really pristine because people weren't screaming. Why the screaming? What's the deal with that?
Well, I think in the most simple reason is that they were just thrilled to be there. I mean, the Beatles were all anybody was talking about, and they were the biggest thing. I mean, not only you and your friends, but you know, the grown-ups talked about them, your teachers, the people on TV talked about them. They were in every newspaper and magazine. So you and your friends get to go out and be in the same space where they are, as they recalled it. And it was just so thrilling. They couldn't contain themselves. They were part of this big thing. And the other thing for girls is that, you know, you have to remember, this was a very different world in 1964. I mean, the repression, the conformity, the very, very strict gender roles. So, you know, for girls to go out together, a group of girls, to go see a Beatles show and scream, like where else could you feel that free and be that expressive? And that was what the Beatles were all about, is freedom and self-expression. So the screaming was just the exuberance, the freedom, but the takeaway message, I think, for all the men and boys who were so bewildered at the time, and even since, why were the girls screaming, and people keep asking, is that the bottom line is that girls liked men who looked and acted like the Beatles. And of course, as we saw over the coming years, more and more men began to look like that. So, yeah, it was a very interesting time to grow up, and it was very, very different world than today, for sure.
Okay, so how do you determine your first, second, third generation Beatles? I was born in '57, so I was 7 years old when I saw the Beatles, but I had two older brothers and older sister, so I kind of like got sucked into the vacuum. So I'm considered what, first generation?
Absolutely.
Even though I was 7.
Absolutely. Anybody with a living memory of Ed Sullivan, anybody with a living memory of Beatlemania is a first generation fan. In other words, you remember it in real time. And so the people that I interviewed for Beatleness, the youngest fan I interviewed, I think, was born in '61. And, you know, that was quite young. And so, you know, obviously this person had older siblings, because what Chachi says is absolutely true. If you had older brothers or sisters, they pulled you into the music, pop culture, all the changes that were going on in the 60s, much of which came through the music. If you had an older brother or sister, you were kind of led into that a little sooner than you otherwise might have been. And many people in our generation say that they grew up faster than they would have because they were exposed to all of this. But even these very young fans remember their earliest memories are just infused with Beatles. Beatles on the radio, Beatles on television, people talking about them, somebody bringing a magazine into the house and cutting it up, or just, they became such an integral part of our childhood. And when you think about how many of us there were, 79 million of us, it was really an important piece of American history, because their impact on us was so great and so enduring. The fact that we're all here today really says a lot. And so that's why I wrote the book, was that I wanted to document that experience, what it was like having the Beatles in your childhood, in your adolescence, and how it affected you, and then by extension, how it affected the whole culture.
And it was a whole different world back then. There were 3 TV stations, and then, you know, you had the rabbit ears in your TV, and then you had UHF, I think, with maybe channel 38, and then you had television, radio, and newspapers and magazines. Far different today when you have Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and news of the Beatles spread so much just from those limited media outlets.
Right. Anytime, there was always some big kid who read a magazine or 16 magazine, or of course later on after 67 when Rolling Stone came along. The news about the Beatles traveled very, very quickly. Somebody heard something. This is still true. Of course now social media is there to help it along, but information about the Beatles went viral before going viral existed, because people were so excited about them that they would just tell everybody. They would tell their friends, and so would tell their other friend, and then everybody knew when the new record came out, or they were going to be on Ed Sullivan on Sunday. Oh, is it going to be really them, or is it going to be a film? And it was just like, oh my God, what excitement.
I remember I was in like 5th grade, and I'm at school hanging out front, waiting to go in Cambridge, Mass. I grew up there, and there's a kid there wearing Beatle boots. And I'm staring at his boots. I'm like, oh my God, look at those boots. He looked at me, he says, take a picture, it lasts longer. And he walked away. And my family, we couldn't afford Beatle boots back then, but it wasn't just music, it was fashion, it was hair, it was attitude.
Yeah, I mean, you wanted to be part of this big thing that was going on, you know, and it made you feel very grown up and empowered because you were in on it, you were part of it, you were a Beatles celebrant, as I describe it in the book, and it did make you feel very grown up and very powerful. And also the big kids let you hang out with them, which was unusual too. I mean, in that sense, it really changed the very nature of childhood, because prior to that, people kind of hung out with their kids their own age. But if you liked the Beatles, the big kids, the older kids, the cool kids would let you hang out, tag along, and then you would get to be in on all these conversations about the songs and the music, and of course later on Paul is dead, and what's with Yoko, and all those things that we just discussed incessantly.
Paul is dead. Oh, the clues. Unbelievable. And I'm telling you, I've read 1,000 Beatle books. Stephanie at home, my wife, has Beatle books stacked up everywhere. I've read them all, and this one really rises above all the others. I really, really enjoyed this book. And Candy's from around here. You know, she's a local girl, and she's put 2 years of hard work into this book. And what are you laughing about? Oh, don't be embarrassed. She's so cute with the hat on over here. I'm sorry? Beatleness.
Beatleness, how the Beatles and their fans remade the world.
And it's really not about the Beatles. It's about everybody here.
It's about us. It's about us. What happened to us when this, you know, bolt of lightning entered our lives.
Stuff that doesn't make it.